In this episode, Golden and I discuss the 2011 movie Source Code. Full speed ahead.
The Omega Beam. Full power.
So back in 2011, I wanted to see Duncan Jones's second movie, Source Code. But other things just took priority at the time, and so I missed it, and then I just didn't think of that movie. Well, Golden wanted to watch it with me, and so we did. Most of this discussion is pretty spoiler-free, but at the end, we do get into some spoilers. Don't worry, though. We give you a spoiler alert and enough time to stop listening to that part in case you haven't seen it yet. So with that said, let's get into it.
I remember being very impressed when I first saw it, and just kind of getting sucked into wanting to watch it a couple times. It was one I was surprised that you hadn't seen.
Yeah, it is up my alley. It's just, sometimes other things take priority and you just kind of forget about it.
I'm going to try to do this without too many spoilers, but it has been 9 years.
Right.
So if you haven't seen it by now, it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, then by all means, go see it, because it's one of those movies that it unfolds, I think, really organically, and I think that's one of the reasons it's so good, that it has the general conceit. You read the sort of description tagline. It says a captain is sent into a computer simulation.
Yeah, he wakes at like 7:40 a.m. on the train, and he has 8 minutes.
Right, and that is the story, but it's such a tiny snippet of everything that the story actually is. And it's kind of difficult to talk about the movie as a whole without giving something away.
Yeah, it's just basically that, and they explain that source code basically is that they can tap into like the memories, but they can only do about 8 minutes.
Yeah, that basically the brain survives for 8 minutes after the body dies.
This person that he's occupying the body of, he really only has the 8 minutes because that's the only thing that the brain had to give him.
Right.
And they're kind of just sharing that space. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how Sean Fentress's body, being occupied by Coulter Stevens, develops. How Coulter Stevens comes to deal with what he's presented as what he's supposed to do, what he has to do, the limitations.
Right.
And what he believes versus what he's told he's supposed to believe.
Right. And for those who haven't seen it, I'm not going to get into too many details, but there's a side mystery, which is the captain doesn't really know what's going on. He sees his superior officers, etc., telling him, this is the task, this is what we want you to do. But he doesn't necessarily know where he is. He doesn't know what's happening to him. So it's sort of like, on the one hand, he has this task to figure out what happened to this person who died.
Well, yeah, and he's told that he's been with them for 2 months.
Yeah.
That he doesn't remember.
Right.
But to me, it was kind of like a mixture of 12 Monkeys meets Groundhog Day, and then you blend in the sci-fi series 7 Days. But instead of 7 days, he's got 8 minutes. And it's kind of interesting to see the blend of the time travel type thing.
It's a really interesting take, because it's kind of like he's reliving the same moment, like a Groundhog Day thing, but it's not magic. It's science.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's not time travel either, because he is not traveling.
Yeah, well, the Groundhog Day, he's like trying to get things right. Well, he's trying to get things right.
Yeah.
And he's limited on his time.
Right.
And the 12 Monkeys, where if he's not able to do this, it's going to be catastrophic.
Right.
Maybe not to the entire world, but to a specific population.
Right. I mean, that's the whole point, that he has to more or less determine what happened in a train explosion.
Yeah.
And he's got this person's 8-minute memory to try and get into this simulated world and figure it out.
And even then, you have to give some, because yes, of course, he's going to get to experience a lot of things that this one person didn't actually get to do or see because that person was probably sitting stationary on the train the entire time.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that they explained is that the quote-unquote source code, what gives the movie its name, is he's in the body of one person from that one person's 8-minute memory because he's sort of physically compatible because his brain waves were compatible. But they actually got 8 minutes from everyone on the train. So the source code is a 8-minute, very complete picture from everybody's 8 minutes, even though he's only sort of a avatar inside of one person.
Yeah, the one thing I caught this time that I didn't catch before, and a lot of times I'm doing stuff while I'm watching a movie, so is that, she says that, she makes the comment to him, the Michelle Monaghan's character, Christina, makes the comment, well, you know these people better than I do. You talk to them all the time. But yet a lot of the people on the train really don't seem to know him.
Right.
So that was the only thing that I was like, that's kind of interesting. And the other thing that I caught this time because you mentioned it is the Scott Bakula thing.
Right, right.
But it's not just that. He starts it off by saying, oh boy. And oh boy is what his character would say all the time in Quantum Leap.
Quantum Leap,
yeah. So I was surprised that I didn't ever catch that because usually I'm listening and I'm very auditory and picking up on voices and things like that. But it's neat that he doesn't know and that he's trying to find out more about himself. He's also trying to find out more about the people and what he's supposed to be doing because they're not being completely honest with him.
Right.
And the drama behind the scenes is also very interesting because you have basically his main handler, Goodwin, and then you have Dr. Rutledge. And
Jeffrey Wright, who is in pretty much everything and is always good in everything he's in.
And Vera Farmiga, I don't know if that's how to say her last name, but she's incredible too. And it's just really neat to see how she's dealing with the job that she's been given. She's a soldier. She obeys orders. This is what you do. And yet she feels she wants to give him more.
Right.
Because you can see that she's sympathizing and she sees that maybe if she sympathizes, he'll be able to do the job better.
Right.
Where Dr. Rutledge is just like, no, he has a job, just he does his job.
Right. It's because he invented the source code technology. And as much as he is a U.S. Air Force officer and obviously has the same mission as of protection as the U.S. military, U.S. intelligence, his ulterior motive is he really wants to show that his source code project is effective. And if maybe that makes him unsympathetic, he doesn't really care that much. He wants to get the job done so he can prove to his superiors that what he's created works. And that relies on the Jake Gyllenhaal character to do his job.
So I'm looking through the list of people that were in this movie, and I'm like, wow, Cass Anvar. He played the character Hazmi. I think that's the one that he follows.
Yeah.
He's from The Expanse. It's Alex.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, wow, okay. I just didn't recognize him. I thought that was really kind of, his appearance has changed enough that I didn't recognize him. But it's a good movie.
Yeah.
Dealing with time.
Like all time travel type, Groundhog Day type movies, if you really dig into, like you were saying, well, how would they know this, or how would they know this person would react this way? You can tear them all apart, but it was really tightly scripted. The plot holds together. The mystery is really interesting, and it makes you really feel for the main character and for his handler Goodwin and for the people on this train who he's trying to save. I mean, he's told by his handlers this already happened, and yet he keeps reliving it and reliving it and reliving it, and they become real to him. And he's a soldier. He saves people. That's what he does. And it's handled really well, and he's a three-dimensional character. He's not simply the protagonist caricature. He's an actual character with his own motivations and his own way of looking at the world and his perspective that may not necessarily match those of his handlers. But I think it makes it really engaging. And I'm very glad that Golden finally convinced me to sit down and take the hour and a half to watch the movie.
So there will be some spoilers from this point on. So if you have not seen it, please go ahead and stop for right now and maybe come back to it later and finish. But we talked about how the one wants to prove. He wants to prove that this is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end of the movie, the one character, Goodwin, has a chance to tell this guy, hey, look, I have proof for you. It works. And she just decides to walk away without sharing it with him. Now, whether it's because she is concerned for Coulter Stevens, concerned what might happen to Sean Fentress, wherever he is right now. I don't even know if she actually, at that point, I don't think she even knows who Sean Fentress is.
No.
But it's an interesting why she chose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether she just can't give in to his ego, or she just wants to always be there for Coulter Stevens. And then the other is, at the end of the movie, he goes beyond that 8 minutes that Sean Fentress no longer had. So now he's inhabiting the body of Sean Fentress. But yet, Captain Coulter Stevens is still with the source code project. So if something comes up again, and there is another opportunity for him to actually prove that source code works, could he do that again? And eventually, could there be a whole bunch of Coulter Stevens running around in the world?
Know. The unmade sequel is writing itself right here on the Omega Beam.
So it's an interesting idea. He's kind of occupying, at least his brain, is now occupying two bodies in one world.
It's definitely a interesting and a deeper movie than simply here's the problem, solve the problem, movie done.
And yeah, that's kind of Jumper, which I know you haven't seen.
I haven't seen Jumper either, no.
Yeah. Jumper is not as great a movie. Mm-hmm. I think it's still a fun movie.
Okay.
But I think you definitely, Captain Coulter Stevens really is the hero. Mm-hmm. And he is a hero.
Yeah.
And he's working through how to be that hero throughout this movie.
Yeah, and part of the backstory of Captain Coulter Stevens is that he's introduced as a hero, as an Air Force captain. So we sort of already know that he has a history in Afghanistan of saving lives. That's who he is.
Yeah, and his father talks about. At one point, they talk about how his father. They play a recording of his father talking, mm-hmm. and that his father recognizes that his son can't walk away from basically, being Batman.
Right.
not as dark, not as troubled of a past, but he has to be the hero, and that's just who he is. Mm-hmm. He's just a good person. Right.
And it plays out. It plays out in very interesting ways. I also think that when you're doing a Groundhog Day type story, you kind of have to walk that line where if you don't repeat the events enough, it doesn't drive home that the person is living the same loop. But on the other hand, if you do it too much, it becomes boring. I mean, watching the same people do the same things, say the same things, the same, accidents of coffee spilling or whatever 20 times. It stops being interesting after a certain number of times. And I think they did a fine job of getting that right, where you live the same events as long as it's interesting, but then they change the scenery. So you're not just in the train or just in his capsule where the captain is. They change the scenery. They make it more interesting. They go outside the box. And I think that helps to make it a more engaging film.
So I'm looking at the trivia on IMDb. Apparently, Jake Gyllenhaal had an earbud in during the train sequences, and the director would start playing random things to help him be disoriented. And then I think you'll also appreciate this one. Jake Gyllenhaal was on board of the production before Duncan Jones.
Oh, nice.
After seeing Moon, 2009, Gyllenhaal suggested Jones as a possible director.
Moon is such a great film. I can't begin to say. And I think that Duncan Jones is a really, really good director. I know that he did the World of Warcraft movie, which was universally panned and I believe flopped as well. But at least his first couple films have all been excellent. And I'm sure he can be excellent again, given the right source material.
Vera Farmiga, in the IMDb trivia, apparently it was the very beginning of her pregnancy, so she knew that she wouldn't be available for the next 10 months. So she filmed her scenes in 10 days.
There you go. Well, she was someone who was only in the one Air Force location. So it's not like she needed to change sets or anything all the time. So they could probably run through her scenes.
And you were right, the comedian is actually...
Yeah. I'd recognized him.
Yeah, but apparently they had to cut a lot of his thing, because he was using original material.
Yeah.
They had to cut a lot of it because it was PG-13.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The caller ID photo of Christina's ex, Brian, is actually Duncan Jones.
Oh, I didn't. It was a quick enough thing. I didn't even recognize him.
Yeah.
Duncan Jones, who looks a little bit like a bearded David Bowie.
Gee, what a surprise.
What a surprise. None
of the sessions in the source code actually last 8 minutes of screen time. The third session is the longest at 7 minutes and 30 seconds.
This is a movie where there's not really any fat. I mean, there's character moments, definitely, and it's not an action movie per se, so it moves at a nice clip, and it doesn't have really any extraneous just slowness to it. This one takes some turns. It has depth to it. The acting is really good. The special effects are really good. And the budget for this movie was relatively low. I think part of it was less than $40 million, which, admittedly in 2011, they weren't making $300 million. But it was still not even high for that era because it didn't have a lot of sets.
Well, and even that in the trivia, they said that the train station they originally were going to film changed the terms on them, so they ended up building a set instead because...
It was cheaper.
Yeah. So they didn't get a chance to actually load the van up with everything. The only thing that was in the van that wasn't CG was the box. It
was definitely it looked good. The acting was good. The plot was tight. I would highly recommend it. And like I said, it's a shorter movie. It's I think an hour and 33 minutes, and it definitely keeps you engaged for every minute of it. There is not a slow moment in this movie. And you care for the characters.
Yeah, you care for the characters. You get a chance to really get a sense of not just these characters, but some of the other characters that are on the train as well.
Right. And I think it's also interesting because, of course, there is a villain. A train explodes, and there's someone responsible. In a sense, the main antagonist is the entire situation. And I think that was a really interesting choice that they made, and I think it works really well. That just the fight, not so much the fight against the antagonist, but the fight against time.
Well, you also have the fight against the doctor that invented the source code.
Right, the guy who invented source code.
Because he has his objective, and he wants to see that objective met, and he doesn't really care that much about Captain Coulter Stevens because it's like he belongs to him.
Right. He considers him just an asset of the program.
He's just
not a person.
Part of the machine.
Yeah. So it's got a lot of moving parts, all of which hook together incredibly well. And it's a very satisfying film. I mean, I think the ending that they picked worked really well. Highly recommended. And if you saw it, I hope you liked it as much as we did. Thank you, Golden.
You're welcome.
And that's it for this episode. You can find the show notes at theomegabeam.com/102. If you liked this episode, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those reviews help people who like this stuff find our podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. Be good to yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you next time.
The Omega Beam. Full stop.